Welcome to the New York Times Book Review Podcast. I'm Gilbert Cruz, the new editor of the Books Desk, and for the next many months, we'll be highlighting great author interviews from our decade-plus archive. Why are we doing this? Well, the two previous hosts of this podcast, Pamela Paul and John Williams, both moved on to new adventures this year. As a result, we are using the next few months to kick the tires on this esteemed audio product and figure out what it should sound like going forward. To do that right takes time, and we plan to do it right. So we ask your patience and look forward to bringing you a new book review podcast sometime next year. This week, we're featuring a lengthy conversation with David Sedaris, who spoke to editor Pamela Paul in 2017 about his book, Theft by Finding, Diaries 1977 to 2002. As you can imagine, he was a delight.
David, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So this diary starts in 1977. Is that when you actually began writing the diary, or did you sort of arbitrarily pick a date?
No, I believe my first diary entry is in there. I just started one day. I was hitchhiking around the country with my friend, Ronnie, and I was writing letters to my friends and people in my family, but I didn't have an address where they could write me back. So I just started writing to myself.
Did you write every day?
Every single day.
So you obviously have edited this down somewhat.
Oh, I mean, I have 64 volumes of my diary, and each one is thicker than this book. And a lot of it is crazy person, tiny letters, front and back page. So this is just a tiny fraction of my diary.
So how did you go about editing it for this book? I mean, did that take forever?
It took forever, and I tried to detach myself and think, would this be of interest to anyone? I mean, a lot of it wasn't even interesting to me. Or it was just interesting for, nostalgic reasons. So I was just looking for things that might possibly interest someone who I don't know.
I'm wondering if you'll get reaction from some of the panhandlers with whom you've interacted over the years, because that seemed to be one of the running themes throughout the book. Unless you edit it out, but everyone is constantly asking you for money or food.
We know the reason. I'm small. I'm 5'5". And when you're a small man,
They come after you.
They come after you. You get asked for money and for things all the time. And Hugh, I'll be with my boyfriend Hugh. No one asks him for anything. They're right to me. And I think it has to do with my size. And plus, I don't look intimidating. And I mean, I've got a big pansy pinned to my jacket.
Yes. It's inviting.
It says, ask me for spare change. That's basically what it says.
But what's interesting, too, is that, the other evolution that you see over time here is sort of going from your meth-taking impoverished days to a more successful and sober era. But no matter what, that's a constant. Like in 1977, when you had no money, they were still asking you for money. And it runs up through 2002. Oh,
and it's a constant today. People go to the airport to ask for money. You're standing outside the airport. Oh, our flight was delayed, and we're looking for some money. We just want to buy lunch. And it's like, nobody travels without their wallet. What was so interesting to me is that they think that might work. I mean, because they don't know the world of the airport. Or, oh, our car is parked here. I came to pick my daughter up. We need $6 for the parking. Well, people who go to the airport have $6 for parking. I mean, but they don't know how unconvincing they are. That's fascinating to me.
In addition to the panhandling, it's amazing to me how many times you witness just these arbitrary acts of violence and outbursts of anger. And I wonder if you just chose to write about them or if you edited around that. But, people are always having incredible tantrums around you, not necessarily related to you.
I lived in a neighborhood in Chicago called Uptown when I went to Chicago to go to school. And it was an incredibly violent neighborhood. And you would see men hitting women. You would see children being severely beaten, animals being beaten. And it really, I have to say, it really affected my outlook on the world. And I lived there for maybe just in that particular location for 3 years. And when I moved out of the neighborhood, my outlook so brightened. But it was striking reading over the diary how if you live in a neighborhood like that, just what it does to your worldview. And you're left thinking that people are basically cruel and cornered and not terribly bright. And just how it changes your attitude to like live in a pretty neighborhood. When you live in a pretty neighborhood, what happens is there comes a day and you think, I deserve to live in a pretty neighborhood. And then the changes really come.
But you make the outbursts of anger sound incredibly sober, and yet they provide some of the funniest passages in the book, just like the incredible heights of anger and foul language that people will be sort of moved toward at the smallest provocation.
Well, that's always interested me, always. I mean, whenever there's a couple fighting or somebody who's just got a quick temper, if I've got hours to kill at the airport, I go to the desk where people have problems and I just sit
lurk
there and I listen. And it's because if you're going to curse to someone at the airport, the thing is you can't look them in the eye. You could say your curse word looking down, but you can't say it looking at them. And so a lot of people don't understand that rule. So I just like to see like who's not in the know today.
There are a couple of moments in here of anger. There's one here from 1991, where you were actually the perpetrator of the violence.
November 1st, 1991, New York. Amy and I met Jeff and Tina for a drink last night at El Teddy's, the fancy Mexican place in Tribeca that sometimes feels exciting and sometimes feels awful. Last night it was the latter. I was standing in front of a woman who was seated at the bar, waiting on friends, and said to her, "Excuse me," as I reached over and dunked a tortilla chip in salsa. I then put it in my mouth and was chewing away when she said, "Hey, you got tomato stains on my pants." I looked down and watched as she stabbed at the red spots with her napkin. She was super angry, like this was the last straw. Her friends weren't showing up, the place was too crowded, and now some idiot had spilled salsa on her new tan-colored slacks. "Oh, gosh," I said, "I'm terribly sorry about your pants." With the letter P, a shard of tortilla chip flew from my mouth right into the corner of her eye. I couldn't believe it. "Jesus Christ," she said. She wanted me dead, and it only got worse when her friends showed up, and I caught her pointing at me, the creep who ruined her outfit and then spit on her.
I love and admire the way in which you and your siblings go at each other, and Paul in particular, your brother Paul. There's this one part where I guess Amy has a pet peeve about loose change. And so in order to exact revenge, what did he do exactly?
He changed $20 into quarters, nickels, dimes, and pennies and scattered it through her apartment. And then he coated her doorknobs with, I don't know if it was Crisco or butter. He'll do that to anybody. I mean, you can't turn your back on that guy. As a child, he was the prankster, and now he's almost 50. Nothing's changed.
But you've left out the pièce de résistance, his last move in that particular act of, I don't know what it was.
He peed a little on her bed.
Yes, the fact that it specified a little. I read that part aloud to my children who are often violent towards one another as it could be a lot worse. Like, at least you're not in this sort of situation.
I feel almost like peeing a little on someone's bed is okay.
Really?
Like just a little, just a few drops is acceptable, especially if that person has pets, because the pets have been doing it.
The other thing that runs throughout the book is, and I don't know if you have a penchant for this kind of thing or if it's accidental, but you go to a lot of bad movies that they don't seem like deliberately bad movie choices, and they're not meant to be good movies, but they're kind of in that middle zone. And there was one section where you talk about going to see Hollow Man.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, Ed. Your team's in early today. Something special going on? Sorry, Ed. You know the rules.
September 21st, 2000, Paris. Hugh and I went to see Hollow Man, the worst movie I've seen in a long time. It opened with Kevin Bacon dicking around on his computer, which is always a sure sign of trouble. He played a brilliant scientist, as did Elizabeth Shue and Josh Brolin. The team had discovered how to make gorillas invisible, and now it was time to move on to humans. I'd always thought that if I were invisible, I'd spend all my time at free movies, but now I'm not so sure. Hollow Man was just as stupid as it could be, and the audience howled all the way through it. I can usually shake off a bad movie, but not Hugh. He railed all the way home. stopping to point out piles of dog crap. That's your movie right there, he'd say. Whenever it's bad, it's automatically my movie. I wrote it, cast it, and directed it with the sole purpose of ruining his evening. I haven't heard him mention it this morning, but the day is young.
You think you're alone.
Why did you have to go out in public?
In Paris, I had a pass, so I could go to as many movies as I wanted, and it was $17 a month. So I'd see anything that moves. There was a theater called the UGC Orient Express, and every movie that played there was bad.
Is that in Leal?
Yeah, that didn't keep me from going there. I mean, the fact that a movie was playing there meant it was bad.
That's the one that's like 4 levels down, right? Yeah.
And you need to leave a trail of crumbs to find your way back out of the basement.
Yeah, I love the way that the French are so encouraging of movies, too, that like if you're unemployed, the movies are less expensive for you.
Isn't that a nice touch? In Paris, I find that people are generally very respectful during a movie. They don't text, they don't talk. Japan is like that, too. A lovely place to go to the movies.
How did you choose the 25 years? Was it just a nice, neat cutoff?
Yeah, I guess it couldn't have been any longer, or the proportions would have been off. It's like the dictionary. It's just, who wants to touch it? It's just too big. My boyfriend Hugh calls the book David Copperfield Sedaris. I mean, there's a pretty profound change in the first part. Not in me. I don't feel like I've changed. Although, of course you do. Of course, when you have opportunities, you change. Your outlook changes. I went from basically having no opportunities to, having a great many opportunities.
Well, you also see your progression as a writer in the book. And when you start off in the early parts, you're working as a visual artist, and then you move on to playwriting and then to writing. When you went back to work on this, were you able to see the change in the quality of your writing and the purpose, it seemed to me, of your writing?
I could. I mean, I can go back through my early diaries and I can say, oh, look who discovered Joan Didion. Because she's such a strong stylist, so I'd be writing like her. Or Joy Williams, also a very strong stylist. And to this day, I can go through my diary like from 6 months ago and often tell who it was that I was reading or listening to. When you talk about the writing in the book, you can't write without reading. Mm-hmm. You can't do it. And it's normal to start off and imitate other people, and it's normal to be pretentious, and it's normal to write 100.
Which you did.
Yeah, and think that you're so brilliant because you did it. There were a lot of pages like that, and I thought, okay, I can't get away with more than one of those in the book. But yeah, I do see that on the page. I do see finding my voice, I guess you would call it.
Were these diaries that you would go back periodically and look at? Or had you sort of, once you finished a diary, you would set it aside and never return to it? And this was the first time that you revisited all of it?
When I started keeping a diary, I looked back and I thought, this is awful. And it's going to be awful for a long time. Because, why would I start playing piano and not expect to be awful in 2 weeks? So I really put it away for a long time before I turned back to it. And then I think I've read through all of my diaries like twice because I have a guide on my computer. A lot of what's in there is not of interest to anybody, but if something is of interest, then I'll put it down on my guide. And that helps me if I'm working on a story or an essay. I can go back through it. Like if I were to write an essay about all the haircuts I've ever had, then I could just type haircut in there and it would be, because I write about every haircut I've ever had. Because my hair's not special in any way. All that's special is that encounter. That's going to come in handy someday.
So you turn back to these diaries as sort of primary material when you were doing your essay writing?
Yeah. I mean, I'm closing a story right now with the New Yorker. And so part of the story took place in Hawaii in February. So it was great. I just was there for 8 days. And so I reread my entire 8-day diary from when I was there. We stayed in this condominium that we found online somewhere. So I had in there, that there was a 10-inch tall crucifix on the kitchen wall. I had written a description of the photo collages, the color of the paneling on the inside of the house. Sometimes you write all that down and you don't ever need it for anything, but sometimes it comes in handy. Then when you're writing the story, you're like, why didn't I write down like every word of that conversation that Hugh and I had? But, you have to live your life at the same time.
You have sections of this book where you're depicting painful periods in your life. And I mean, the one that stands out is early on where you have this moment and you're saying, well, I'm either going to become a total meth addict or I'm going to stop right now. And then like 2 entries later, you're doing meth again. Did you sort of feel compelled to portray yourself as you were and sort of warts and all during these periods? Why include that?
When I was looking for things to cut out, I was more inclined to keep something that made me look bad than to get rid of it. Something that would make somebody else look bad, that's kind of a different story. But because usually when you're admitting the bad things, that's how people relate to you.
Right.
Because they think, oh, I did that too.
I too looked in the mirror one day.
But to be truly addicted to a drug it's a dark, horrible feeling. And it just overtakes your life. And it's like a train and you have to get off of it. And you know what will happen if you don't get off of it, but the opportunity presents itself. And I don't know why some people are more susceptible to that than others. I mean, I had a neighbor at the time who would do meth, but she could have it in her freezer and do it like once a month, where I had to get up first thing in the morning and I had to do it all day. And I would go days and days without sleeping and, just always thinking of when you can get more. And I was so fortunate to be addicted to meth when it wasn't popular. I mean, my dealer moved out of town and that was it. But
there was
today,
no more available.
Right. Today, it'd be the easiest thing in the world. And I don't know that I could have quit if she hadn't moved away. And she moved back to town. And then she said, okay, I'm open for business again. And I was able to say, no, I remember what that was like, getting off of it. And I don't ever want to go through that again. And I love drugs, but I never took meth again after that.
Why did you decide to publish these diaries now?
Whenever I do a stage show, I always end by reading things from my diary. Whenever something would work and get a nice reaction, I would put it into a file I have on my computer called Diary That Works.
As opposed to the diaries that don't work?
Yeah. And so I thought I would publish that file. It was my editor who said, why don't you go back to the very beginning and why don't you find things that aren't necessarily funny and see what those look like? So it didn't turn out to be the book that I imagined it to be. I thought it was just going to be that book of gutbusters. But that wouldn't have really told a story. Well, the story that would have told was, look how clever I am. And I think people already know how clever I am. So
They do. It's not a look how clever I am book, but it definitely shows that you are clever. And you're doing another one.
Well, the idea is to do a second part, but I'll just have to look at it, what I've got there, because there's not an arc to it that I can see. Perhaps I peaked a number of years ago. And
so
then
it'll be a downward arc.
It'll be a downward spiral. Could be
With a tragic ending. I'm sure it'll have a happy ending. David, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for having me.
That was our conversation from 2017 with David Sedaris. We'll have more from the Book Review Podcast Archive next week. Thank you for listening.